Hi, everybody. It is Stories Live. So today is Wednesday, December 16th. I figured you probably need a reminder because I can't keep track of time anymore. So tonight, the theme is gifts, but, very general theme, just sort of a suggestion out there since it is the holidays. And so we're going to have Shannon Lawrence, I should say, Richard Friesen, Sue Fine, Sara Beets, and Tom Broderick, who writes under the name Thomas Kichi. So we have a pretty good lineup for tonight. Unfortunately, Aaron Michael Ritchie was originally supposed to join us, and he isn't able to because he's actually sick tonight. So just, quick reminder, wash your hands, wear your mask, stay away from people. There's a lot of cooties out there right now. I did want to mention a couple of things before I forget that our next show is going to be on January 20th. And that will be featuring Jeffe Kennedy. Let's see. I don't actually have her most recent book here, but I do have this one that she read from. And I think that was actually a reading she did at Book Bar with Dorinda Jones. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I don't know, it's just nice to remember those times when we were able to go out and, see readings in person. Not that this isn't delightful too, but, just like I'm looking forward to mixing it up again someday. And in February, on the 17th, we're going to have Pam Houston joining us. She wrote Cowboys Are My Weakness, among a lot of other things. And Deep Creek, I think, is her most recent book. I'm not sure. I haven't gotten to it yet, though. So I'm looking forward to that. So I just have a couple of things I want to share with you. And I know I should have like handier props than just like reaching over and grabbing things. But, this is the setup I've got here. But there is this piece from Harper's, and I'm obsessed with Harper's, but it's really short and it's so relevant. And it's under requests, and it's called Essential Miracle Workers. It's from a letter sent in August by the chairman of the Fraternal Order of Real Bearded Santas, Rick Irwin, to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Greetings from our nation's front line. We are founders of the modern, real bearded Santa world. In 2009, our fraternity successfully petitioned the U.S. government to extend priority access to a swine flu vaccination to professional Santas. This was based on numerous factors, including our advanced age, underlying health issues, and high rate of contact with young children who are notorious vectors of disease. This year will be remembered by everyone in the country as the worst year in memory, if not our entire history. Should a vaccine be approved by December, it is the overwhelming consensus of the Christmas community that it be made available to Santas immediately. Only then might we rescue just the tiniest bit of happiness. Please make Santa Claus a national health priority. Thank you. So, nice little Christmas spirit thing. And the other thing that I wanted to share, just as promised, I don't know, how many people are looking forward to this, but there is an excerpt from a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson about a lady who isn't actually able to get close to anybody. And it seems very relevant to the times we're living in now. It is a pretty long poem, though, so I have edited it down to a much shorter piece because I know that time is short tonight. But it's called The Lady of Shallot, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but, probably have, read it or heard excerpts of it in various things. So I ended up chopping off part one, which is basically just, a very long intro to the scenery and everything, and making it all very gothic. So we're starting with part two. No time hath she to sport and play, a charmed web she weaves alway. A curse is on her if she stay her weaving, either night or day, to look down to Camelot. She knows not what the curse may be, therefore she weaveth steadily. Therefore no other care hath she, the Lady of Shallot. She lives with little joy or fear. Over the water running near, the sheep bell tinkles in her ear. Before her hangs a mirror clear, reflecting towered Camelot. And as the mazy web she whirls, she sees the surly village churls and the red cloaks of market girls pass onward from Shalott. Sometimes a troop of damsels glad, an abbot on an ambling pad, sometimes a curly shepherd lad, or long-haired page in crimson clad, goes by towered Camelot. And sometimes through the mirror blue, the knights come riding two and two. She hath no loyal knight and true, the Lady of Shallot. But in her web she still delights to weave the mirror's magic sights. For often through the silent nights, a funeral with plumes and lights and music came from Camelot. Or when the moon was overhead, came two young lovers lately wed. I am half sick of shadows, said the Lady of Shallot. And then she basically, there's this point where she sees Sir Lancelot riding along and he's singing and, his hair is flowing and everything. And then she's basically just like, okay, you know what? I'm going to put myself in a boat and go down the river and I'm just going to go and experience the world that way. Cause that's my option as a lady. So then we get to part three. A long drawn carol, mournful, holy, she chanted loudly, chanted lowly, till her eyes were darkened wholly and her smooth face sharpened slowly, turned to towered Camelot, I should say. For ere she reached upon the tide, the first house by the waterside, singing in her song she died, the Lady of Shallot. Under tower and balcony, by garden wall and gallery, a pale, pale corpse she floated by, dead cold between the houses high, dead into towered Camelot. Knight and burgher, lord and dame, to the planked wharfage came. Below the stern they read her name, the Lady of Shallot. They crossed themselves, their stars they blessed. Knight, minstrel, abbot, squire, and guest. There lay a parchment on her breast that puzzled more than all the rest. The well-fed wits at Camelot. The web was woven curiously. The charm is broken utterly. Draw near and fear not. This is I, the Lady of Shallot. So I don't know. I don't think it's safe to draw near anybody right now. So don't take that last bit of the poem to heart because you draw near, you might die. Okay, so speaking of death, let's get our first reader up here, Shannon.
I like that intro. Speaking of death.
So how are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good, hanging in there. So what have you got for us this evening?
Okay, so it is Christmassy.
Nice.
So it's from Happy Ghoulie Days. Pew, pew, pew.
Yay.
And it is called Last Elf Standing.
Okay, nice.
All right. And so I'm going to do a little disclaimer since it does involve Santa and elves and it is her. I advise not having anybody with sensitive ears around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Normal disclaimer. If you are sensitive, cover your eyes and have a friend stick their fingers in your ears for the duration of the story.
Or one for each ear.
Yeah, there you go. If you're popular, you can do that.
And if you're gathering against recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I will let you go forth and read. And yeah, good luck.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So last elf stand-in. The sound of hammers and saws echoed throughout the workshop, along with high-pitched mutters and conversations. Belts whirred along on well-oiled tracks. Peppermint infused the air. It could have easily been an over-frenetic workspace, but the elves made it feel jovial and pleasantly energetic. It was November, and they were hard at work finishing up the final products for Santa's Christmas deliveries. The remainder of December would involve wrapping and packing everything to ensure Santa could make his usual flawless deliveries. The old jelly bowl of a man was fast asleep in his chair, perched on a platform on one side of the workshop. Though he liked to get hands-on with the products whenever possible, he tired more easily these days. The elves had been keeping an eye on him, wondering when enough would become too much. Mrs. Claus had passed away years ago, the world none the wiser. Ever since then, Santa had aged at an accelerated rate in every way that mattered. His round cheeks had sunken and wrinkled, his cheery eyes sagging. Even the drollness of his mouth had evaporated in the face of his thinning lips. Age spots had appeared almost overnight, gracing his face, hands, and arms. He tried his best to hide it all, but the elves saw everything. Letters from children around the world were arriving already. The elves read them all, passing especially important ones to Santa. It used to be he read everything, but that had become an impossibility as the world population grew. Given there were areas he wasn't welcome, so he didn't have to visit them, but there were still far too many places where kids eagerly awaited Santa on that one special night each year. Some of those letters asked for intangible things Santa couldn't deliver, such as a child's parents getting back together or for abuse in a household to stop. It was these types of letters that elves delivered to Santa to read. Though he didn't have the sort of magic that would allow him to do something about frightening and heartbreaking issues in the children's lives, he always tried his best to do something special for them. He felt it mattered, and in the right situation, sometimes he could leave them the tools to take care of the issue, or at least cope with it. But today, Noelle, the mail manager elf, got a letter she needed to show Santa for a different reason. The tiny hairs in the back of her neck stood up as she read it. While she knew Santa needed his sleep, Noelle thought Santa needed to see this even more. She bolted across the warehouse, leaving a fluttering trail of envelopes behind her. Santa? Noelle reached out a tiny, tentative hand and nudged the snoring man on the knee. She tried again, this time harder. Santa! Santa snorted himself awake, his face red where it had been resting on his palm. He looked around with squinted, perplexed eyes and cleared his throat. Finally, he looked down and acknowledged Noelle. What's wrong? Noelle had hidden the letter behind her when Santa started to wake up. For a fleeting second, she thought about keeping it from him. It could be from a crank, someone who thought it was fun to write nasty letters to Santa. But for the letters to get to the North Pole in the first place, there must be a sense of real emotion in them. Very few negative letters got through, but those were always from someone who truly hated Santa or had some other awful emotion attached to what they'd written. That meant this one had to have conviction behind it. Still hesitating, Noelle drew the letter from behind her back and held it out to Santa. He sent her an inquisitive look, but took the letter and studied its contents. His eyes widened as he scanned the page, brows furrowing. He drew his bottom lip into his mouth and chewed on it, a bad habit he'd had for a long time. Finally, he looked from the letter to Noelle. This came with the others? Yes, sir, I'm afraid so. I need to think about this for a while. Do me a favor and keep an eye on the workshop floor while I go have a nip at the pipe and figure out what to do. Noelle nodded and watched Santa leave the room. The big man's clothes had become oversized on him. He still towered over the elves, and he wasn't skinny by any means, but it was obvious to all who cared to see it that the great man had lost weight. He was no longer solid and round, but saggy and unhealthy looking. Even the color in his cheeks had disappeared. In lieu of his declining health, the letter made sense, but who would send such a thing? Noelle played the contents of the letter over in her head, trying to pick out any clues as to who might have sent it. Usually she had a feel for the writer right away. This time was different. All she felt was a gray cloud of obscurity and insanity with no real identity. The letter had said, Dear Santa, step down or the elves die. Do the right thing. It was straightforward and frightening, not least of all because Noelle was an elf herself and therefore on the chopping block. But if Santa stepped down, no one could fill his shoes. He never found an apprentice. No one had been qualified. Santa had been born into his powers, and throughout his long, drawn-out adulthood, where he'd looked much the same from about the age of 24, he'd never happened across one other soul with similar powers. If Santa quit, that part of Christmas was over for good. There were some long nights, full of peppermint schnapps and conversation, where Santa had wondered aloud whether he was immortal, and this was his forever lot in life, or whether an end could and should come someday. He felt that his gift-giving had inspired others to do the same, and that now Christmas had taken on a different spirit, one of greed and corruption, but also self-maintenance. With or without Santa, people would continue to give each other gifts. Add to that, they didn't even have to earn the gifts they got from each other. Naughty or nice, those who had gifters in their lives got them, and those who were alone received nothing. It was no longer a holiday that perpetuated any responsibility to behave or to do good in the world. Santa often wondered if he'd become obsolete. The second international trade became nearly instantaneous. As it was, people could order something online or by phone and have it delivered the next day. Even some delivered the same day. They could order their food this way: a chauffeur, gifts, many necessities, anything they wanted. It was perhaps also this revelation that abetted his rapid aging. If Santa was obsolete, did he even really need to exist anymore? Noel worried that without this job, Santa would waste away within days. It was likely only the sense of purpose that drove him and encouraged him to plow forward as Santa Claus, the mysterious and jolly gifter of joy. He hadn't been without his job since his 20s. Seeing as how he'd made it all this time with no major hobbies or side jobs, he had nothing to fall back on. And what of the elves? Noel had no idea where she might go if she didn't have this life anymore. All elves dedicated themselves to Santa. Was their lot in life. They had much shorter lifespans than the big man, with an average old age of 30. But they worked from childhood on, trained by their parents or other relatives. Santa encouraged them to retire by between 20 and 25 so they could relax at the end of their lives, but most insisted on staying around to finish, often expiring at their workstations, which is exactly how they wanted to go. In fact, that sounded great to Noel. The reindeer would be fine. He was on about his 100th set during this time. Like any pets, they never lived long enough. Santa shed a tear for each one that passed away. He was a man with a big heart, bigger even than the rest of him. He remembered the name of every elf and reindeer he'd worked with through the years. They were all lucky to have been in his service. Noel heard of elves who had run away and tried to live out their lives elsewhere. It never ended well, and they certainly didn't even see the tip of 30. Even so, Noel sometimes wondered if the freedom they tasted, albeit for such a short time, was worth it. She was happy at the North Pole, but some days when she felt especially run down, the thought of that type of freedom whispered sweet nothings in her pointed ears. Deep in thought, Noel didn't notice the workshop becoming increasingly quiet until one lone hammer was the only sound. No more voices, the saws had stilled, and the distant patter of footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Looking out from her seat in Santa's chair, Jingles was the only warm body with her in the room. The end of the day had come, and Santa hadn't returned. He might still be deciding what to do, but knowing him, he'd likely fallen asleep again. Noel flipped over onto her belly and wriggled down until her toes touched the floor. You almost done, Jingles? Jingles stopped with his hammer in midair and looked up at Noel. This is my last one for the day. I'm good here if you want to head off to dinner. Noel nodded and set out to find Santa. She had to walk by the cafeteria, which hummed with the voices of hungry elves, many still waiting in line to grab their food. Sprinkles caught Noel's eye and waved, her green curls swooping across her eyes so she had to brush them to the side. Noel returned the wave and braced herself to step outside into the blowing snow. Santa's favorite spot to smoke his pipe and think was a rock in the middle of a wooded area off the reindeer barn. Both warm and private, it gave him a place to be alone without having to go to his cabin, which echoed with his wife's absence. Some mornings, Noel found him asleep in his chair in the workshop. Once, she'd even found him curled up in some clean hay in the barn, two of the reindeer standing guard. The cold air slapped against her, seeking each accessible inch of bare skin its tendrils could reach. Ice pellets dappled her face. The snow came to waist high in her, but she was accustomed to moving through it even when it reached well over her head. Elves had been made for this sort of climate. Before Santa had come along, her ancestors had hidden out here, safe from humans. They'd lived in ice caves and inside dead trees thick enough to give them warmth. Wading through waist-deep snow was easy by comparison. Santa wasn't in his usual spot. Noel cast a glance toward his cabin, but no smoke rose from the chimney, and the lights were off. He wouldn't be there then. Light flickered in the barn window, and Noel steered herself that way, wondering if this would be the second time she found Santa asleep with the reindeer. One of the doors stood ajar, snow piling into the barn entrance. It wasn't like Santa to leave doors open, nor would she have expected it from the Wrangler elves. The heat hit her at the same time as the scent of fresh hay and wet reindeer, a thick animal odor. Behind that, Noel smelled something different, something even more animalistic. Her instincts recognized it before her conscious mind, causing her skin to crawl before she knew why. Rubbing her hands over her arms to ease the goosebumps, Noel went deeper into the barn, moving around the sleeping reindeer. A dark shape stood out against the rectangular stacks of hay at the back of the barn. Noel squinted, but couldn't make it out. It wasn't big enough to be Santa. She drew closer before the smells became recognizable over the stronger odors of the barn, elf blood and feces. Noel covered her mouth and nose with her hand and continued forward. Her foot hit a slick spot and she slipped, throwing out her hands to catch herself. Her right hand landed on something warm, soft, and tacky, and she gripped it to keep herself from falling. It shifted a little with a metallic rattle. She looked up to see what she'd grabbed. In her hand, Noelle grasped a red jumpsuit soaked green with elf blood. Snowflake, one of the Wrangler elves, had been trussed up in the reindeer tack, a metal bit in his mouth. His eyes had been removed, green dribbling down his cheeks from the dark sockets. He had somehow been mounted to the hay so that he faced straight ahead, hands and legs dangling through the much too large tack. His slit throat gaped open, tongue hanging from it. Noelle gagged. She turned and ran to the entrance, heedless of the reindeer lounging in furry lumps around the barn. Crispin grunted when Noelle's foot kicked him in the side. He raised his antlered head but didn't get up. The lack of reaction from the reindeer to the death in the barn puzzled her, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Outside in the snow once more, Noelle took frantic, shallow breaths, trying to calm the racing of her heart. She bent over, hands on her knees. The warm air from the barn trickled against her back, but she craved the cold, needed the calming feel of it. She sunk to her knees in the snowdrifts and buried her hot face in the comfort of the ice. Her breathing slowed, body temperature coming down. She needed to get help. The killer was here, had been in the barn recently enough that the blood had still been warm when she touched it. For all she knew, the killer could still be in the barn. She could have been within inches of the perpetrator. She dragged herself to her feet and moved as quickly as she could through the deepening snow. Her earlier path had already filled in during her trip to the barn. In the darkness, lit only by the moon bouncing off the white of the snow, she saw no other congruent paths back to the main building. The other elves would be in their dorms by now, settling into bed, reading, playing quiet games. Had they even noticed Snowflake was missing? Santa would know what to do. The problem was finding him. The massive compound consisted of several interconnected buildings, not big to a man the size of Santa, but to a single elf, it made up a lot of ground to cover. The temperature inside the main complex felt pleasant, and Noelle headed for the workshop right away. Snow melted from her clothing to leave her in the floor wet with her passage. Just as she had expected, the cafeteria stood empty, clean, and tidy. She'd missed dinner, but any hint at hunger had dissipated in the face of her fear. Noelle ran into the workshop. The main lights were out, but there were always small lights along the floor throughout the compound. Elves habitually worked through the night on Christmas as Christmas approached, and if they couldn't sleep at other times, the workshop was a welcome respite from their restlessness. Santa had made it as friendly a workplace as possible. She'd never noticed how creepy it looked when only the floor lights were on. Shadows cast up on the ceiling arced over her, and standing near the lights blinded her somewhat to the area around her. The green tint of the lights didn't help how ominous everything felt. A dripping sound drew Noelle's attention to a workstation toward the center of the room. She grabbed a ball-peen hammer from the bench closest to her and stepped away from the light so she could see better. Everything looked fine from where she stood. Nothing hinted at what might be causing the sound. For a brief second, she considered leaving without investigating what it might be, but knew it wasn't realistic. What if the killer were hiding in this room, and she left herself open to attack by leaving? With soft steps, she moved toward the center workstation, edging around stools and desks to keep from advertising her approach. The dripping grew louder, the pace slowing. An odd, inconsistent squeak joined the drip. Only one row away from the tall workstation, Noelle smelled something she recognized this time. Elf blood. She ducked down behind a desk and collected her thoughts. The smell meant there was probably another dead elf, but it didn't mean the killer wasn't there too. Whoever it was had probably seen her enter the room and hidden. She had to go in expecting them to be waiting for her. Hefting the hammer in her hand, she made sure the balance was good. Many an hour had been spent in this room working with hammers, and it felt natural. She would have been equally able with any number of tools. A deep breath in, and she shot up, vaulting onto the desktop. She leapt toward the center desk. Her foot hit the surface and slid, but she caught herself and yelled, "I've got you!" But when she looked down, she couldn't understand what sat on the floor before her. It was lumpy and rocked in an unsteady, crooked way, more side to side than front to back. The scant light glistened off it in places as if it were wet. What she thought of as a squeak now sounded more like a damp squelch. The drip continued. Something puddled around the base of it. After a quick look around for any sign of an attacker, Noelle climbed down from the desk and ran to turn on the lights. When their glare blasted into the room, she felt more exposed than before. A lone figure in a large, bright room, she searched the entire workshop this time before approaching the strange shape. Even in the light, it took her a minute to decipher what she was looking at. The first thing she recognized was a scalp covered in straight green hair. After that, a mishmash of flesh, bone, blood, and hair became apparent. And there in the front of a lopsided human rocking horse was the face of Jingles, who she'd left alone when she went to search for Santa. His body had been broken and sawed apart, then formed into a toy, a grotesque mock-up of the one he'd been working on when she'd last seen him. 2 wooden ears had been attached to the top of his head, and a brushy tail stuck out from his backside. Noelle turned and ran blindly, out past the cafeteria, past the front door. She became aware of her high, keening wail and tried to stop it, but couldn't bring herself under control. The door to the dorms stood out ahead, a welcome sight. She'd be safe as she stayed around the others. Safety in numbers. Slamming through the doors, hammer still clasped in her hand, Noelle came to an abrupt stop. Dead elves, their body parts scattered, decorated the entire room. Green blood covered the beds, the floor, even the walls and ceiling. Their heads had been collected into a pile in the middle of the room. Their tongues had been pulled out of their mouths to hang like morbid ornaments. At the very top, like the star at the crown of a Christmas tree, stood Sprinkle's head, her once beautiful curls hanging down as tinsel on the tree of heads below it. Noelle's stomach rolled, her gorge rising. The scent of death stood thick in the room. She hadn't known she could feel more horror, but it filled every inch of her, a tingling, panic-filled static. She backed away, darting her eyes around the room for any sign of threat. The triple bunks didn't provide much space for anyone to hide, and there were no closets or chests within the bunk room. The door to the bathrooms and sitting area on the far side of the room was closed. One tiny, bloody handprint had been pressed low onto the door. She pressed her back to the doors and pushed them open behind her, not taking her eyes from the chaos in front of her until she was through, and the door swung shut in front of her. Swallowing against a dry throat, she turned around, ice crawling up her spine, knowing what stood behind her. At the end of the hall, Santa stepped out. He had changed into his full red velvet suit, and his black boots were bloodied. A streak of green blood stood out in his snow-white beard. Pain she couldn't have imagined coursed through Noelle's chest at the sight. "You?" she asked. He shook his head, lips downturned. "I'm sorry, Noelle. I didn't see it coming." "See what coming?" A slight stench of rot drifted down the hallway. Noelle wrinkled her nose against it, but couldn't figure out the source. It wasn't Elf. "I just wanted her back." "I didn't know." He reached a hand out to his side. Out stepped Mrs. Claus. The cold had preserved her well, but her skin was gray-green and sunken. Her lids hung heavy over her eyes, and her mouth drooped. Her belly swelled against the restraint of her blood-covered velvet dress. She'd pulled her hair back into its usual tight bun and put a trace of makeup on. Blush stood out on the woman's hollow cheeks, a merry touch on an obscene visage. She took the hand Santa had offered and stood beside him. The dead woman's mouth stretched into the semblance of a smile, her teeth brown behind the shriveled lips. "You could have just quit," Noelle cried. "Why didn't you save them?" It wasn't what she really wanted. He released his wife's hand and grasped her shoulder to pull her close. He nuzzled her hair, then leaned a cheek against the top of her head. She wanted a clean break. "What about me?" "You're the last elf standing, my dear. There's nowhere else to go. It has to be this way." Noelle shook her head to clear her thoughts. There had to be a way out. The door to the outside stood right behind the Clauses, the beacon of hope. Grief and fright roared in her chest, and she tried to push it all aside to focus on the doors. With a scream, Noelle held the hammer up over her head and ran toward the couple who had been like grandparents to her, the people she had dedicated her life to. Santa stepped to the side, eyes downcast. He wouldn't do the dirty work then. Mrs. Claus held her hands at her sides and loomed before Noelle. She had no weapons, her fingers bent into bony hooks. Noelle made as if to strike Mrs. Claus, but instead she dropped into a slide, hoping it would carry her through the woman's legs. The stench escalated as she drew closer, reaching its ripe as she slid beneath the skirt. The dead woman's hands missed Noelle, but she managed to grab the hammer, which brought Noelle to a dead stop. Flakes of rotting skin dropped onto the elf's face. Noelle wrestled for control of the hammer. Mrs. Claus brought her foot up in slow motion, her ligaments creaking. Then she stomped downward toward Noelle's face. Noelle rolled to the side, colliding with the woman's other leg. More skin rained down upon her, some of it damp and thick. Mrs. Claus's thumb broke with the dry snap of a twig. The hammer came free. Noelle wriggled free, then bolted through the doors. She shoved the hammer through the handles on the outside to trap the couple inside. Mrs. Claus's face peered through the slim window, and she rattled the door. The hammer wouldn't hold long. Noelle didn't need long. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, the ones who hid in snow caves. She could make it out here, bide her time. Running to the barn, Noelle threw open the doors. "You're free. Santa has killed the other elves. Run!" Startled from their sleep, the reindeer stared at her in puzzlement. Friesen stood up and looked at her. "Run!" she screamed. "Get out of here before he kills you too." Friesen nodded and bugled a call out to the others, which did what Noelle's words hadn't. The reindeer stood, shook themselves off, and exited the barn. Friesen strode up to Noelle, a monolith above her, and dipped his head. She grasped his antlers, and he flipped her up and onto his back. He ran through the doorway just as the Clauses came around from the side of the compound. They must have run to one of the other exits. Noelle held tight to Friesen's antlers with one hand. The other she brought to her face, laying a finger alongside her nose, and a final goodbye to the Clauses. The next time she saw them, it would be to finish them. The time had come for them to retire. And that's all.
That was just delightfully, morbid. I love it. And, Christmassy at the same time. That's my kind of thing. Oh, my mom says it's vivid. Vivid is a word.
I saw the
Yeah.
worst layoff ever comment.
Yeah, that was me.
All
right.
Almost made me laugh.
Well, cool. Yeah. So now is this in Happy Gula Days, or is this a different thing?
Yeah, this one's in Happy Gula Days. There's
Nice.
only 2 of them are Christmas stories. The rest are other holidays, but yeah.
Awesome sauce. Okay, well, I will let you go for now, and I'll bring Richard out here to torture him. All right. So, Richard, you are live with us, or with me, I should say. I can't hear you. Oh, you've muted yourself. Unmute.
I'm muted to make sure no one would, I wouldn't interrupt Shannon. Anyway, hi, everybody.
All right.
My story isn't available anywhere. Yeah.
No?
No.
Okay.
It's not really a Christmas story, but it's a ghost story, which used to be a traditional Christmas thing to have ghost stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not, I don't really write horror, so I'm not sure this really qualifies as horror, even though it's a ghost story, but it is what it is. So.
All right. Well, I will give you the floor, and I look forward to hearing it.
Okay. Are you ready? This is called Hot Rod Haunting. A car roared by, I already messed up. A car roared by outside. With coffee halfway to her mouth, Sara stopped. Her soul turned to ice. She knew that car, that engine, a 426 Hemi in a 1972 Barracuda, candy orange with a black stripe. It had belonged to Darwin's father, but Darwin had restored it. He'd loved it. Why did it haunt her? The last time she'd seen it, the Cuda had been wrapped around an REA pole, smoldering in the rain. Thunder had rolled overhead, masking the sirens. Sara stood, dressed torn and dirty, watching her hopes and dreams die along with Darwin. Now, if she went to the apartment window, she would see a dust plume on Cherry Creek North Drive, a paved street in Glendale, Colorado. The ghost car had followed her from the high plains. It made sense on the gravel road near the country church, enough sense for Sara to run to the city. Nothing made sense in the city. Another car followed the first, loud but higher pitched, newer. Sara's head came up, not a V8, maybe not even American, rushing out the front door onto the apartment building's second floor balcony. Sara glimpsed the Cuda as a sports car passed it on the curve by 4 Mile Park. The other car's rear wheels slid out, kicking up ghost dust from a gravel road 300 miles away. 2 cars haunted her now? Was that a Mazda? Did she know anyone who drove a Mazda? Both cars vanished as a real Honda drove the other way. Sara closed her eyes, dread settling into her chest. Something bad had happened. Going back inside on autopilot, Sara finished her eggs and toast, washed the dishes, and set them to dry. Her mind floated in worry, waiting for the other shoe to drop. As she opened the door to head for work, her cell phone played The Beatles' Your Mother Should Know. As she answered, the dread landed on her like a lead weight. Hi, Mom. Oh, dear. Her mom's voice sounded congested. She sniffed. Jacob crashed night before last. Did Sara's stepbrother drive a Mazda? And Sara sank to the living room floor. He didn't make it, did he? Now her dread had a name. But why would Jacob haunt her? Her mom said, we just spent over 30 hours at the hospital in Liberal. He went through surgeries and intensive care, but he'd been hurt too much. This happened Saturday night? Sara could have gotten there easily. Mom, why didn't you call? The hospital makes you turn off your phones. Reception, Mom, why? Her mother sighed. Oh dear, Carla kept thinking he'd get better and she didn't want to bother anyone. And her parents had just left. She didn't want to ruin it for her sister, so she asked us to wait. Carly's parents had been there? Her sister? Oh, hell. Carly's sister was getting married, got married. Another wedding too painful for Sarah to go back for. Jacob must have chased the bride and groom. He was too old for that. He should have known better. Then it all came back down on Sarah. Jacob wouldn't call her anymore. He couldn't make her laugh anymore. How could that be? Carly must be devastated. Sarah sighed, trying to hold back the tears. What could she do? Could she miss work? Thinking through the purchase orders waiting and the vendor calls to make, she decided she could get through it in a day. Not that she felt at home at her job or anything. It was just a place to earn money. The lives of the women at work differed so much from hers. They didn't know her sorrow, and the life on the plains didn't make sense to them with their mountain bikes and Broadway shows. I'll be home tomorrow. Matt and the kids are coming. Can I put you with Carly? Jacob and Carly lived in Uncle Luke's old house. Carly would need company. Sarah wished she knew her sister-in-law better. Sarah just hadn't been around since the wedding. Being away hadn't stopped the haunting, though. The next day, after driving 6 hours, Sarah headed south on the so familiar part of K-23 toward Englewood Route. When she topped the hills rising out of Crooked Creek Valley, the plain spread out before her, grass and crops as far as she could see, above it the glorious sky. White puffy clouds danced on the perpetual wind, dwindling hundreds of miles into the distance. The Cuda and the Mazda blew past again. They'd followed her all the way from Denver. With them around so often, it got easier. Her stomach didn't clench so much, although it made passing slower cars challenging. Jake and Lena's house on the corner had been bulldozed and plowed under. Sarah turned east and headed down the blacktop. The house a half mile in on the right was gone too, and the Isaacs place further down. Just one house a mile up a gravel drive remained before her mom's place. Meadowlarks and doves sat on the fences and flew low over the grass, far more numerous than she remembered. Where had those come from? Then she looked at the fields. A third had been left to grass. Another government program paying farmers not to grow. The debates around the supper table and the co-op raged without resolution over whether those programs were a good idea or not. Sarah drove past the yellow two-story place with the wraparound porch where she'd grown up. 3 big combines and 3 semis sat parked on the yard. 2 giant sheds almost blocked the corral and little feedlot behind from view. Horses grazed nearby and cows dotted the pasture. Grandma's house should have been next, but it had succumbed to time and tillage like the rest. The field where once it stood had been put back to grass too. If Sarah had understood Jacob right in their phone calls, 3 large farms remained where 24 families had once made their living. Sarah drove the half mile down to Carly's. Turning onto the gravel drive, Sarah stopped. The lilacs east of the drive remained unchanged, as did the roses under the window west of the front door. Jacob had built a porch, though, the porch Aunt Mary had always wanted. He'd painted the place, too, no more red shutters. Sarah pulled up next to the house and shut off the engine. She'd been away from home too long, far too long. The Cuda roared down the blacktop to the church, and that rainy night came back. She turned to look past the field to the gravel road, but the lilacs blocked her sight. Wind rocked the car and tears rolled down. It should have been her and Darwin in this house, with this porch. She fought back the grief, wiped her eyes, and opened the door. The dry wind blew in, swirling around the front seat. Why would Darwin want to haunt her? Why couldn't he go away? Shouldn't he have gone to heaven by now? Carly came to the door and opened the screen. Her blonde hair swirled around her shoulders. Jacob had married the prettiest girl in the county. She had bags under her eyes and a haunted look now. Sarah got out and went up the steps to hug her sister-in-law. Carly, I'm so sorry. Carly, eyes red and puffy, wouldn't meet her gaze. Supper's almost ready. Come on in. Sarah stepped over the threshold and stopped. Aunt Mary's built-in shelves and desk on the east side were gone. More, Jacob had removed the wall between kitchen and living room. New hardwood floors, new paint, and new furniture sat in the long living room's west end, and a dining room table on the east. Wow, I like the remodel. Carrie bustled to the kitchen and pulled a casserole from the oven that was mounted in the cabinet. Those were the same. 5 or 6 more dishes waited on the counter. The neighbors had brought food. Jacob did such a fine, she stopped, face almost cracking like her voice. Her mouth twisted. She stepped to the table, motion preventing a breakdown. We should eat while it's hot. Sara sat, and Carla took the chair opposite, leaving the head empty. Taking the initiative, Sara took Carly's hand and bowed her head. Dear Lord, Sara paused. Leading prayers didn't come up often in Denver. We need all the help we can get, and bless this food. Amen. Amen. Smells delicious. Sara served them both. Would Carla come apart? It might be better if she did. After taking a bite, Carla's eyes went wide. Oh! She jumped up and retrieved green beans with almonds and a salad from the counter. Glancing over, Sara saw a cutting board with vegetable remnants. Carly had made the salad herself. The rest had come from the church ladies. A strange juxtaposition between Carly's need for activity and need for help from friends. When Carly got back to the table, Sara reached across to touch her hand. Relax, Carly, I'm family. Darwin's V8 thundered outside. Sara startled. What's wrong? Sara closed her eyes. Actually, after the accident, I went on harvest, then off to college. I've only been here a few days since then. Oh dear. Carly dissolved into tears. Sara went around and held her, tears on her own cheeks. The accident came back, the terror in her gut as the tires broke loose, the driver's door caving in as they spun into the pole with shrieking and crunching steel. Glass erupted through the interior. She'd stopped screaming and silence fell. Metal pinged, glass tinkled, and rain pattered on the roof. Darwin, are you okay? Darwin? He never answered. After the funeral, when it seemed she'd never stop crying, the ghost car had roared by the first time. She missed Darwin still. Now, so close to that pole on the gravel road, the fear gripped her gut. Seemed bigger, more real when the kudos roar shook her soul. What did he want? At last, Carly straightened and wiped her eyes. Sara did the same and changed the topic. No safe topics existed, though. Where did Jacob get a Mazda? Carly chuckled. On harvest last summer, we cut for this family with a daughter in college. She got pregnant and didn't need a sports car anymore. It amused Jacob to own a car so fast and odd out here. Catching Carly's hesitation, dread settled in Sara's chest. How much more could Carly take? Sara whispered, are you pregnant? Carly wailed and collapsed against Sara again. Yes, what am I going to do? Again, Sara held her sister-in-law, but this time didn't cry. She knew the answer, but didn't think Carly could hear. Not yet. Still, she might remember later when she could. You live, just live. 1 hour, 1 day, then the next. There's nothing else. Except being haunted by your boyfriend and stepbrother. Here now, she had to figure out how to stop them. Carly sat up and rubbed her face. Her voice sounded hoarse. Your mom wants to go to the funeral home yet tonight. Just like mother. Then we better get dressed. As she went out to get her suitcase, Sara realized her mother and Carly had so much in common. Both had lost their husbands young and had to raise kids on their own, at least until her mom had met Raleigh. Sara didn't remember her real father. How could 3 men have died young in one family? Late that night, Sara sat at Jacob's computer in the basement office, searching ghosts and hauntings. Carly's parents would take the upstairs guest bedroom tomorrow, which relegated Sara to the basement. She didn't mind. After the trip into town with Sara's parents, talking about flowers and songs for the service, they spent an hour in the funeral home's little chapel. Jacob lay in his coffin, serene and still. He looked more wax than flesh. The Mazda's high-revving engine outside startled Sara again. Later, Sara lay down, but sleep eluded her. So she got up to learn about ghosts. Dressed in her long t-shirt with her legs curled up on the office chair, she found hundreds of references to white blotches in pictures, noises, and chills. Some said someone living was holding on to the ghost, or the dead had some unfinished business. They all espoused their pet theories, but no one said anything about cars. Who had ever been haunted by cars? With a sigh, Sara closed the browser and leaned back. She was on her own. What did Jacob and Darwin want? Here, where the accident happened, both accidents, she might be able to find out. She hoped she could find out. Going to the bedroom, she pulled on jeans and Converse, although boots would have been better. Then she tiptoed up the narrow stair. They still creaked, but Jacob had covered the ugly old linoleum with carpet. The odd little place at the top of the stair had a door into the breezeway, a strange little room with doors to the house, garage, yard, and drive, with shower, toilet, and sink in the corners. Right next to the breezeway door, in the little pantry with the freezer between kitchen and stair, another door led outside. Sara exited there, smiling at the familiar unchanged architecture. After descending the 5 concrete steps, Sara headed across the yard. The gravel drive went from the road around the house's east side to the 3-car garage attached north of the breezeway. The drive also looped back east past the electric well and around the lilacs. A grassy sward between drive and field to the north held farm implements. Rather than go around to reach the gravel road, Sara decided to cut across the pasture. The REA pole stood less than a quarter mile away, north of the church. For a moment she stood, cool breeze tossing her hair. Myriad stars shone overhead, far more than you could see in Denver. Gathering her resolution, Sara walked to the fence and went up on tiptoes to straddle the electric wire. She almost fell, pulling her other leg over. Maybe walking on the road would have been smarter. Sara headed across the grass, smiling as her old senses came back. She avoided cow pies without thought. Walking in the dark made her uneasy. In Denver, she had to watch her surroundings. Here, coyotes would leave her alone, deer would run, and cows ignore her. 10 minutes later, after another harrowing fence traverse, she reached the horrible pole. It had no chips, no scars. They'd replaced it. Sara laid her hand on the rough wood. What do you want, Darwin? She missed his crooked smile and mischievous eyes. One Sunday morning, he'd sat out on a toilet by Uncle Luke's mailbox, pants around his ankles. Hiding behind a newspaper, he didn't move while people drove to church. Everyone thought someone had put a dummy there. That seemed so distant from this dark, windy night. Sara waited, pacing, looking at the ground and the road. Neither Darwin nor Jacob showed up. You haunt me for years, and then when I want you, you don't come? What is that? No engine noise shattered the night, no Cuda or Mazda. After half an hour, she gave up, heart sinking. How do I make this stop? She headed back across the pasture. Out in the middle, something snorted behind her. Fear took her belly. One dangerous thing might lurk out here, a bull. Turning, she saw the beast 50 yards away, shining black and huge in the moonlight. Bulls had different temperaments, some aggressive, some not. She'd been gone too long. She didn't know this one. Sara backed away, putting distance between them. She couldn't outrun a bull, not for long. The beast put its head down and charged. Sara ran. The hoofbeats thundered nearer. As it closed in, Sara swerved. Just as she thought she'd be gored or trampled, the Cuda roared through the field. The bull leapt away. Darwin did a donut around her, spraying up imaginary dirt. Sara stood still, breathing hard. Why could the bull see a ghost car? The Cuda fishtailed one more time and headed for the road where the Mazda waited. Watching them go, Sara stood in the dark field trying to figure it out. After a bit, she walked over to see if the Cuda had left tracks and divots. It hadn't, but the bull had run away anyway. She did know one thing now. Darwin meant her no harm. He'd saved her. Sara walked back to Carly's house, a smile on her face. Darwin still loved her. Sara woke late with a thought rattling in her brain. A dead man still loved her. Damn. She had to do something. If he didn't want to hurt her, maybe he just wanted to finish what they'd left undone. How did you finish a life together? Climbing from the bed, Sara went to the little shower in the breezeway. Carly would let her use the good bathroom inside, but Sara wanted to be alone. She almost changed her mind as she stepped under the warm water. The rusted sides and grimy floor all smelled like a man. Jacob must have used it as a mudroom. You didn't bring dirty clothes, let alone shoes, into the house. As water streamed over her, Sara considered what she could do for Darwin here in the country. Here, a woman cooked supper for her man. Halfway through soaping up, Sara stopped. She could cook him supper, but what would ghosts eat? No, cooking for a ghost made no sense. When Sara made it out to the kitchen, Carly stood at the range top making eggs and toast. You don't have to cook for me. Don't be silly. Sit down and eat. Carly's eyes still looked puffy and her voice sounded raspy. Watching Carly bustle around the kitchen as she sipped coffee, Sara began to understand. Carla needed something to do. Cooking and cleaning let her feel normal. Would it help if I tracked in some mud? Carly looked startled and chortled. Laughing harder, she bent over double and sank to the floor. Sara cracked up too, slipping from the chair. Soon enough, though, the mirth turned to tears. Sara ended up on the kitchen floor, holding Carly again. Cry all you want. I cried for weeks when Darwin died. It helps in the end. For dinner, Sara and Carla went to Mom's house for barbecued beef sandwiches and potato salad. On such a nice spring day, Sara, Mom, Dad, Carly, and Matt with his wife and kids ate out on the porch, facing southward toward the road and Oklahoma. Sara's nieces and nephews played with the dogs and cats and ran out among the trees in the yard after only eating a little. Sara had wanted kids once. When had she given up on that? Now she ignored her brother's brood and toyed with her food as flies buzzed around. What could she do with Darwin? Talk ranged from crops to livestock prices, to kids' school and gossip from church. They included Carly to make her feel wanted and needed. Carly looked like a china doll glued together with Elmer's. All the women, including Sara, went in to do the dishes and talked another hour. What could she do with Darwin? Later, on the way out the door, Sara turned back on impulse. Mom, I need the dress. It felt right to use that dress. Oh dear, I threw it out. Her mother never threw anything away. Mom, I need the dress. Now. But dear, you need to move on. Go get it. Her mother sighed and went up to the attic. In a moment, she came back with a garment bag. Carly's eyes looked haunted as they walked to the car, but she said nothing. I'm sorry, Carly. I have to make my peace. Taking a shuddering breath, Carly reached out to touch Sara's hand. It's just so fresh. What am I supposed to do without him? Squeezing Carly's fingers, Sara shook her head. I don't know, but it will come. It will. There's time to choose. Back at the house, Sara put the bag in the basement and helped Carly putter around the house until her parents arrived. She knew them from church years ago. This had been their community once too. When Carly married Jacob, they'd given up the farm, leased the land to Jacob, and moved to Heston. The big Mercury drove onto the yard, and Carly's parents emerged. After the hugs and introductions, they rather insisted on taking Carly to dinner in Dodge City, 40 miles away. Carly didn't look at all excited about it. They invited Sara, but she declined, saying she had errands to run. As they drove away again, Sara stood on the porch, not sure what to do. She had the dress. The only idea she had was cooking supper for him. Sara got her purse and headed into town for groceries. An hour later, she cooked Salisbury steak, hand mashed potatoes, and creamed corn. Country comfort food. At the table, she hesitated. Should she set 2 plates or 3? What should she do about Jacob? Unsure, she opted for 2, even though she'd made enough food. Ghosts didn't eat, did they? This was insane. Donning the torn, burned dress, Sara stepped out onto the porch. The perpetual wind whipped at the chiffon. Dark clouds hid the stars to the south over Oklahoma. Lightning danced to the ground and lit the sky over and over, an uncommon show, even here where the sky entertained every night. I'm here, Darwin. Come to me. Sara waited several minutes before the CUDA drove onto the yard, engine a rumbling idle. Darwin shut down the ghost car and opened the door. He stepped out wearing that crooked grin. She could see through him, but it didn't matter. Her heart melted. She missed him so much. Wearing a tux and cowboy boots, Darwin clomped up onto the porch without a sound. How could his eyes hold sadness and mischief both? She opened her arms, and he stepped into them, his touch as soft as a cat's tread. He kissed her lips, barely brushing hers. Sara drew a shuddering breath. He'd had a ring in his pocket that night, but she'd always known he would ask. Besides, she'd already given him her heart. Come in, I made supper. He walked in behind her, hand a breath of wind on hers. She sat down to eat. What would he do? I'm sorry it took me so long to figure it out. He just grinned. Did time matter to a ghost? Darwin went through the motions, but the mashed potatoes remained unchanged on the plate. Looking at a ghost across the table, Sara didn't eat much herself. Still, she'd gotten him here. What next? What would she have done that night? Oh. Sara grinned, rose, and offered her hand. Come, my love. Leading him downstairs, she took him to her bed. The first time she'd ever brought a man home, and he was dead. They couldn't, or could they? Lying down, she couldn't pull him over her, but he didn't need help. Darwin, still grinning, stretched out beside her. And when he leaned in for a kiss, Sara closed eyes and imagined him alive and there. The whispering touch sent a shiver through her body. Then he moved around, inside, and through her. Sara cried out at the unexpected pleasure and intimacy. Did sex feel like this? How would she know? Aroused was not quite what she felt, or not all she felt. His need for life, for forgiveness and release, permeated her. Oh, Darwin, I forgive you. I couldn't have then, but I can now. This isn't what you wanted either. Stay with me as long as you need. I will give you what I can. They lay together, with him deep inside her, overlapping her for what seemed an eternity. She'd considered a man inside her, but not occupying the same space. How strange, but nice, too. Then Darwin faded, his presence no longer with her. Sara stayed on the bed until the feelings drained. Was she still a virgin? She hadn't even gotten undressed. When she'd made it through college without a serious boyfriend or even a fling, she realized she wasn't over Darwin. Now she'd seduced his ghost. Sighing, she pushed off the bed and changed back into jeans and a sweatshirt. Sara headed upstairs to deal with the food and wash the dishes. When she reached the kitchen, Darwin's ghost lounged on the couch out in the living room. Chuckling, Sara picked up the remote. You watch TV while I do the dishes. While stowing the leftovers and washing up, she couldn't help but grin. This could have been her life, at least in winter. In spring, summer, and fall, farmers worked sun up to sundown, sometimes longer. On those days, she would have taken food to the field and cleaned up after. The city had shown her other options. Still, she'd grown up here. It felt comfortable. Just as she finished, the Mazda drove out onto the yard. Sara looked up. What was she supposed to do with Jacob? Glancing at Darwin, she found him looking out the window. He pointed with his chin. You want me to? She waved at the yard. Darwin nodded. Sara squinted at him. Perhaps it wasn't sex after all, but something more. You aren't staying forever, but you needed me. Would he leave her again? Would she grieve? He gave her that grin and winked. Shaking her head, Sara walked out on the porch. Come on in, Jacob. Come to me. Jacob emerged from the Mazda and moseyed on up. A big man, he never hurried. How had he driven so fast? Hugging her, he kissed her cheek, and it almost tickled. When she led him inside, Darwin had gone. The bed didn't seem appropriate for her stepbrother, so she went to the couch. He stopped to look at the TV, a slow smile blooming. How could she let Jacob inside her like she had Darwin? A shudder took her. He sat just as unsure, but his posture said he needed something, needed her. Would it somehow help Carly? She reached out to him. You were a good brother and a good husband. He looked so forlorn, it broke Sara's heart. If she was going to do this, she had to go all the way. Scooting around, she put her feet on the couch and lay down, arms wide but legs together. Come, stepbrother. Grinning, he shook his head and patted the seat beside him. She joined him, watching TV for a bit. On impulse, she scooted sideways. Jacob looked down at his shoulder, intersecting hers. He moved into her. Sara gasped, drawing a deep breath. Jacob brought a different intimacy, love but not desire. What did this ghost melding mean? How did it work? Did they each bring their own spirit to the joining? The car drove onto the yard, followed by slamming doors and voices. Carly and her parents were back. Rising to greet them as they came through the door, Jacob stayed inside Sara, waiting. What did Jacob intend? Carly looked haggard. They all sat down in the living room to talk about crops, weather, sports, church, politics, anything but the accident and the funeral tomorrow. Jacob squirmed inside Sara. He wanted something, and Sara had a guess, but not with Carly's parents there. At last, Carly rose. I'm beat. I'm going to bed. She looked more stressed than tired. Her parents had upset her. As soon as Carly emerged from the little bathroom, no longer Aunt Mary's pink fluffy place, her parents retired for the evening too. Sara read a Guidepost magazine, waiting for Carly's mom and dad to close their bedroom door. They would still hear the little alcove beyond the living room had the bath straight ahead and bedrooms right and left. Sara went to knock on Carly's door as soon as she could. Mom, I said. Carly opened the door. Oh, hi, Sara. She stepped back to let Sara in. The room, once white and ordinary, now had gray walls with blue trim, a king bed, and brushed nickel fixtures on the lights and sockets. Sara shut the door behind her. Were they awful? Carly wrinkled her nose and sat on the bed. Yes, no, they were just my parents. I'm a grown woman, not a teenager. I can make my own decisions. Sitting beside Carly, Sara grinned. They can always get to us. What you need is a hug. She wrapped her arms around Carly, and Jacob flowed halfway into his widow. With a blink, Sara knew what to say. Carly, I know it's hard, but you need to let your plans and dreams go. Those belong to you and Jacob together. Do what's right for you and the baby. Carly's breath caught, and she sobbed again. Sara just held her, and Jacob stayed with them both, waiting for the racking heave to ease. Sitting up at last, Carly wiped her eyes and pushed back her glorious blonde hair. She chuckled. Jacob would have told me that. That's why I married him. He just knew. I was so lucky. Jacob's reaction coursed through Sara. He had loved her so much. He thought he was the lucky one. You'll find new dreams. Sara hadn't. She just existed until this week. Doesn't feel like it, Carly said. Not yet. You're the only one who understands. Sara shook her head. No, Mom does. Look what she did. Built a new life. That's what she'd done. For a moment, Carly stared, mouth open. Recovering, she nodded. You're right. I'll talk to her. When Sara got up to leave, Carly stopped her. Would you stay? It would comfort me, and you shouldn't be in that icky basement room. Would staying be risky with Jacob here? He wanted to stay. What could a ghost do? A little imagination in that old movie might suggest a lot. Of course I'll stay. Sara went down to get her t-shirt and toiletries. When she got back to the room, dressed for bed, she stopped to consider forlorn Carly. How about a bedtime prayer? Looking up, smoke filled Carly's eyes. Had Jacob prayed with her? Yes, I would like that. She slid down to kneel beside the bed like they had as kids. Sara laughed as she joined Carly. I haven't done this in years. She bowed her head, still smiling. Lord, we're two sad, lonely women who need distraction, direction, and a dream. Help us. Help me know what I should do for my baby. Amen. Carly rose and slid back into bed. I'm going to talk to your mom tomorrow after the service. Sara walked around the giant bed and climbed in. Another person could have fit between them. Jacob did. He had one arm in Sara and the other in Carly, like she wouldn't feel what he needed her to without Sara as conduit. Sara reached out to take Carly's hand, right in Jacob's body. Jacob's love flowed through Sara. How much made it to Carly? I feel like the most popular girl in school invited me for a sleepover. Carly giggled, a sound which bordered on hysteria. Jacob left during the night, but Sara found him at the table with Darwin as Carly's mom cooked pancakes and sausage for breakfast. Hesitating a moment, Sara sat in Darwin's lap. She tried to hide the gasp. She'd missed him in her life, and she'd never had this intimacy. When Carly came out, she sat on Jacob. No gasp came, no shudder, just a minute relaxation. So only Sara could see them. Only Sara could feel them, like Darwin moving inside her now. She took a bite to hide a grin. Both boys stayed in the house when Sara, in a charcoal business suit, and Carly, in a black dress, walked out to the car to head to the funeral. Sara paused a moment before getting in Carly's parents' big Mercury. The Cuda and the Mazda weren't there. Where did they go? The funeral went as expected. Flower ceremony before, singing and praying during, more singing and praying at the graveside behind the church. The potluck dinner put on by the church ladies followed, giving Carly a chance to talk to Sara's mom. When they drove on the yard afterward, Carly got out and walked off toward the field. Jacob and Darwin waited, sitting in the glider on the porch. Sara told Carly's parents to go inside and followed Carly. The wind tossed their hair, and clouds flowed across the bright blue sky. To the northwest, a thunderhead grew, dark purple clouds massing 100 miles away. Carly sighed. I love this place. I love the sky, the sunrise and sunset every day. For a while, they just watched the rippling grass and the cows in the distance. At last, Carly turned to Sara. I'm leaving. I'm going to stay with my parents till I figure out how my child and I will live, what our dreams will be. Sara looked over at the house. Darwin and Jacob stood by the breezeway now, and the truth dawned on her. Chuckling, she shook her head. And I'm staying. Can I rent your house? Her boys were here. They wouldn't be for long, but they'd left their cars. This could have been her house, her life. Now it would be, with ghosts. Sara, what about your job? Sara shrugged. We're a technology company. I'll work remotely. I just need internet access. Carly hugged her. Of course you can rent my house. They went back to watching the barn swallows swoop and dive. A red hawk sat on a fence post like he owned the world. A car roared up the gravel road toward the church, a black Mustang. Carly didn't notice, even as it slowed to take the corner. Darwin and Jacob walked through Sara, leaving a shivering, pleasant calm. They moseyed out into the field and kept going. A sad smile grew on Sara's face. There go our boys. Can you see them? Darwin just punched Jacob in the shoulder. Jacob shoved him back. He's wearing that stupid cowboy hat. A tear fell on Sara's cheek. Carly took her hand. Are we going to be okay? The Mustang pulled onto the yard. Sara turned. It had Tennessee plates. She'd never been to Tennessee, didn't know anyone there. Yes, it will take a while, but we've started. That's why our boys could leave now. A man, or ghost, she'd never seen before got out of the Mustang. What did he need? Would his loved ones come? The magnitude dawned on Sara. She had so many questions. Why her? Why here? Was this a way to love her neighbor? It would take a special love to help them all. Her heart knew the answer. It was her task because she could do it. In the end, it didn't matter. Her boys were coming, driving their hot rod cars. The end.
All right. Yay, Richard. Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
reading that. Sorry, I have a bug in here and it was distracting me. Okay, so yes, I will go ahead and let you off here. And so next, I think we have Sue. So let me get Miss Sue up here.
Oh.
Ah, very nice hat.
Festive.
I love it. It is very festive. And a wig. I don't think that's your normal hair.
Yeah, it's part of the hat.
Nice. Okay. Well, I will let you. What are you reading for us tonight?
I'm reading. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm reading a personal essay. It's got a little bit to do with Christmas.
Nice.
So, ready?
I am ready. I will just get my fat face off of here and.
Okay. So first, I wanted to give Amy And Stories Live, a shout out. Amy, you are a silver lining in the pandemic cloud. And a shout out to my New Jersey writing group who, during pandemic isolation, Zoom has reunited me. And it's like 1,800 miles and 4 years of separation. It's now attainable, sustainable, life-saving orbit. Their Friday week, they have a Saturday for free write prompt, and that's where this story came from, in the free write prompts. And I kind of want to warn you in advance. I'm having these very strange vision things going on with my left eye, what it's seeing and interpreting. I haven't figured it out yet. So, like visions of sugar plums dance in children's heads while they're dashing through the snow. For me, this season, letters are jumping and skipping in frenzy on the page. So don't be dismayed if random words like aardvark and blasé, unrelated to the tale, even grunts and guttural sounds, emerge from my mouth while I read. Or you might hear a faint tap, tap, tapping as my dog insists on occasionally passing through. So we'll see how it goes. The story is called, or it's Wait Until It's Soon, in part A Christmas Tale. And it starts, of her and him, it begins. What is it that you want him to do? I tried to keep my voice calm, a constant white noise kind of response. Her voice was peaking and dipping as she struggled to hold emotion, rage and frustration at bay, clamped down. It leaked through as she spoke alternately with breath held, and then she shrilled, her words hissing through clenched teeth. I want him to treat me like an adult, to stop out shouting me. I am an adult after all, she whimpered. She believed things had to change. She believed her generation was going to make it happen. This took me back. I was a child of the 60s. We believed things had to change. We believed it was us who would make it happen. Over 50 years later, where were we? Ironic. He's just worried about you, I said. I know, her voice cracked. All right, I'll ask him to call you back. Later, I heard him crying as he talked to her on the phone. Crying is better than yelling, I thought. He's always forgetting something, his keys, his cell. How many times has the man returned from a shopping trip unable to complete a purchase because he's forgotten his credit card? So when his phone rang this time, I answered, in case it was her. She agreed to give him daily updates when she got home from the demonstrations, safe. Not tear gassed, not hit with rubber bullets, not slammed into by a vehicle. Each day that text or call was his lifeline. One more day his daughter made it through okay. Hello, I answered his phone. Your dad forgot his phone. He's at Home Depot. Me too, she said. I just got back. I need him to help me assemble my new hard hat. Ouch, I thought. Okay, here he is. He'd just come in. Be gentle, I whispered to her before taking his phone to him. It's your daughter. I think I heard him laughing as they talked. Laughter, stage 3 of acceptance that your daughter is a frontline protester. He was trying to find humor in the face of the surreal explosions within a country that is hemorrhaging. Crying beats yelling, laughing beats crying, I thought. Rock, paper, scissors. I used to say trumps, laughter trumps, but lately I've been trying to come up with alternative words to use. Damn, that used to be one of my go-to words in rock, paper, scissors analogies. When the family name got changed from Drumpf to Trump, did they know or even care that they'd be contributing to the de-evolution of the English language? Just 2 weeks before, she'd been furloughed from her job and gotten into baking, making the perfect pie crust. Then all the shit went down. She had taken to the streets. On Christmas past, I remember one Christmas when I had saved some serious money for the first time from chores and babysitting. I was maybe 12. One of my initial flirtations with being an adult. Sometime that previous summer, I bought Christmas presents for my family members and friends with my own money. I bought wrapping paper. I carefully wrapped each gift, precise folds, ribbons tied perfectly, tape placed straight. I piled them on a daybed in my room with 6 months to go until the holiday. At first, the pile seemed impressive. Periodically, I rearranged it, a pyramid of presents, remembering what was inside each festive package, checking the gift cards. I imagined recipients opening their presents on Christmas. I may have even unwrapped one gift to re-review it or switch gift cards, altering recipients. Over the months, the presents became dog-eared, no longer possessing that crisp freshness of newly wrapped packages, covered with a layer of dust. The ribbons drooped. Suddenly, there seemed something perverse about Christmas presents sitting wrapped in the hot weather, like holiday stores that are open for the summer tourist season at certain shore towns, grasping for revenue. Somehow, Christmas and sand seem at odds, except maybe in Florida. That was the only year I did that. From then on, as I eked my way towards adulthood, I attempted to approximate a mantra of sorts concerning timing. Wait until it's soon. Acquire and wrap the presents within an appropriate time frame leading up to the holiday. Apply this sense of timing to everything. The magic of overnight. For a while, I believed in the magic of overnight. Like Santa makes the Christmas Eve trek with Rudolph et al., dispensing gifts to countless children in an eternity of time. On certain nights for me, there existed the magic of overnight. When summoned by extraordinary circumstances, as sunset, daylight escaped, and darkness was born, this timeless state came to be. Anything was possible. At 15, when I got home from boarding school on Christmas Eve with nothing for anyone, I stayed up all night making gifts. I remember a hippie headband I crocheted for my godmother. Beads and baubles were woven on each side, framing her face, I imagined, like a princess's when she wore it. 50 years later, when she approached 90 and started to close out her life, she gave it back to me. That long, she held on to it. A gift from me. That long. Most likely she never wore it, except that Christmas when we exchanged gifts. But never mind. I was touched she kept it. When she passed, I didn't know what to do with it, though. What had seemed so grand to me when I made it, and then over the years must have sustained a quiet splendor in the loving glory of her mind's eye, neatly folded in a drawer, now looked limp. It smelled musty, like my godmother's death did. But since I have a distinct inability to get rid of things, it's probably tucked somewhere amongst other ill-fated attempts with yarn. Another such overnight gift-making endeavor involved crafting a collage for my father, using a technique I just learned, transferring pictures I saved from newspapers and magazines to illustration board using lighter fluid. First, laying out my composition, I attached one image at a time temporarily to the board with masking tape, poured lighter fluid on the back of the clipping, then rubbed it with a pencil at a roughly 30-degree angle. The pictures transferred mirror image onto the board with the stroke of the pencil textured into them, giving the resulting collage a raw, handmade feel. At the time, that night seemed magical, timeless, although now I suspect I was high on the fumes. I managed not to incinerate the house, but I did come close to self-asphyxiation from inhaling the lighter fluid fumes. My father loved the piece. Featured on the upper right was a soft-edged portrait of the blonde French actress Catherine Deneuve. He'd once described her as the most beautiful woman in the world. I didn't get it, but for him I featured her. On the upper left, a blue-eyed, white-blazed tuxedo tabby kitten rested their paw on a mid-air, barely implied surface and gazed outward, looking straight into the soul. My father had the collage framed in a slick silver Nielsen gallery frame and hung it in the dining room amidst his dense, eclectic art collection. He used to say to guests, and this is my Robert Rauschenberg print. Christmas ongoing. As I aged, shedding the skin of decade after decade, I perversely stretched the practice of the art of timing to the opposite extreme. I defied time. I beat against its barriers. I waited to the last possible moment. I consistently misestimate the time holiday preparation would take. No, I was misestimating, but nevertheless proceed with the belief that there would be plenty of time, although there was not. I crammed things up so last minute my wrapping was lopsided, the paper not altogether even covering the gift, barely sticking tape plastered at cockeyed angles, the idea of keeping the underside of the tape free from cat hair abandoned. I've been known to rush to a department store minutes before the store closed on Christmas Eve for the holiday and grab something off a table of the sad remainders of gifts that nobody else wanted. Once involved in an adversarial tug of war with another last-minute shopper, I can imagine the sweater we both grabbed being torn in half, like the potential plight of the infant King Solomon saved from one of two warring women. I don't remember if I scored the sweater or released it. Once, at a particularly low point, buying late Christmas presents after the holiday, I tripped on a discarded stuffed animal lying on a gritty, bland tiled floor in the checkout line. The toy was being repeatedly stepped on by frenzied shoppers looking for post-holiday sales. Picking it up, I gazed at the forlorn facsimile of what appeared to be Winnie the Pooh's companion, Piglet. It was the saddest, ugliest piglet I'd ever seen. At the time, it reminded me of me, a pathetic, desperate remainder that nobody wanted to buy as a gift for anyone. Should I rescue this distorted, dirty, trampled piglet? I considered it, but I did not, causing Piglet to belong to no one. Best I could muster was to pick him up and place him on the counter so at least folks would stop stepping on him. Not saving him, I still regret it. Once, on Lexington Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, I stopped by my regular deli to grab takeout for lunch. Outside the deli, two brightly colored canaries, one yellow, one blue, lay dead on the street. Shocked, I stood and stared at them. They were so perfect. Their brilliant colors at stark contrast to the drab concrete on which they lay. Someone had placed them carefully, heads touching, the thought being, I imagine, to at least lay them together, a small memorial, in death united. I wonder how they died, or briefly, if they were actually dead. At any moment, they might fly away, if only I waited just a little while longer. I didn't wait. I ducked inside the deli. When I came out, they'd been kicked apart, one to the curb, one slammed up against the building facade. It was only a matter of time before they got trampled. I thought about ugly Piglet. The canaries were as beautiful as Piglet had been ugly. Still, in the end, nobody wanted them. Someone even seemed to find them despicable. I thought about my father's ugly art collection. The collection was interspersed with other art he collected, including work by famous artists, that of unknown talented artists. I thought of his dumpster diving collection, his obscure, quirky discoveries he found at yard sales at the thrift. They sat beside great works purchased at auction. Everything he had and kept was wanted. Ashes to ashes and stuff to stuff. Now I surround myself with stuff. My stuff, the remains of stuff of others who have passed. Since my father outlived his peers, he became the caretaker of the stuff of the deceased of our family. His brother's stuff, He'd never married. He had no children. He was a modest man. When he died, my father saved his stuff. His diplomas he framed with pride. The faded celebratory articles about him he tucked in an old scrapbook. A progressive rabbi, he'd been adored by his congregations. I'd never realized. When I visited him at Tulane's Hillow House in New Orleans, we sat on beanbag chairs. His ceremonial garb. My mother's. When she died, my father saved her stuff. The poems she wrote, her illustrations, volumes of sketch pads and sewing projects, her coffee tin lids, in case she might have come up with something useful to do with them, even a baggie labeled pieces of string too short to use. She in turn had saved my grandmothers, even though they never got along. So then for my mother, when she died, my father saved my grandmothers too, even though he never liked her. All this time, I took for granted my father would be carrying their memory. Finally, though, my father died. I became charged with saving his stuff and all the stuff he'd saved of those who died before him. To my surprise, sorting through his stuff, I found all these things about me he'd saved. It was like opening years of Christmas surprises. My 10th grade boarding school evaluations, my elementary class pictures from my one summer at summer camp, my short stories and poetry, letters and drawings, my entire life as it had been so far. Since there has never been a place where I could count on staying, I also carry the ashes of decades of my feline and canine families. My father had family ashes buried at sea. He wanted his ashes jettisoned into the ocean as well, but I nabbed them. They sit in my china closet next to my dog, Max Cloud9's. All these ashes and all this stuff are my memorial to the lives of my family. My family lives on in my memory of them. As long as I live, I will carry their stuff. I will not forget them ever. Of her and me in conclusion. When her own mom was alive, she used to tell her that they had Romani blood. While I cart around stuff, true to the eclectic art collector and dumpster diver my father was, in the end, she travels light. Stuff does not mean much to her. She is all spirit. I am resolved to the knowledge that when I die, all the stuff I carry of those who have passed will be jettisoned. Now, as I continue to relentlessly add years towards yet one more decade to my life, as it has been so far, I envy her youth, her fierce resolve to claim adulthood in what she believes can be a new age of justice that her generation will vanguard. I hope she is right. As for me, although at times I do embrace the hope of rediscovering the magic of overnight, too often I wait, dreading the arrival of, until it is soon, the end of life as I have known it. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Sue. That's, kind of morbid, but
But not
I'm
her.
into
Not her.
it. All right, so let's see. I'll take you off the hot seat here, and then I think we've got Sara next. Yeah, we've got Sara next, so I will add Sara here. Hi.
How are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
All right, doing all right.
Nice. All right, so what have you got for us tonight?
So I wrote a story about someone who was a gift in my life. So hopefully I go throughout it without crying. We'll see how that goes. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to hearing it.
All right, thank you. All right. 2 weeks ago was the first time that I realized that I may never see you again. The thought weighed upon my chest with sadness, and I refused to let it sink in further up until now. To live in a universe without you would be to never experience a spring day ever again. It was only appropriate that you were born in late May because you were the spring. Your hair was the color of sunshine, and your eyes the green hue of shaded leaves. Your smile was always warm, your voice always spoke with the gentleness of a soft breeze, and your laughter was more pleasant than the tunes of the songbirds you fed. Your patience and kindness were the welcoming respite to the harsh winters of cruelty that ruled this world. Just like the last pleasant spring day of the year, you were beautiful, inviting, and cherished. I spent much of my childhood subconsciously idolizing you. You possessed a constant, comforting aura that always made me feel safe, loved, and uncriticized. Still to this day, I try to gauge how to acquire the same temperament. However, if you were the appealing mid-spring day, then I was certainly the unpredictable late winter night. I was born 70 years after you, in early March. Some places in early March, like the southern states, it is pleasant and bright with flowers. March in Colorado is snowy yet sunny, the perfect ski weather. However, early March in the Midwest is tricky. Some days are mild and bright, others gray and cold, and some days are harsh and blizzardy. I have spent so much of my life desperately forcing myself to be like the gentle spring day you were, but could only seem to coax those moments out of me sporadically, not consistently as you could. While our temperaments were at times quite opposite, we still had many things in common. We both loved to play Scrabble and Racco, feeding birds and squirrels, gardening and writing poetry. Our taste buds both craved pizza, fried chicken, chocolate pudding, and angel food cake. We also both loved to craft, although you were much more talented than I when it came to homemade gifts. Your crocheting skills were masterful, with adorable baby dresses and perfectly patterned Afghans your specialty as gifts for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We added more of your homemade ornaments to our Christmas tree this year, my favorite being the bird feeder one, complete with actual bird seed in the middle. You were the type of person I aspired to be. Your intelligence, consideration, piety, positivity, and love were all a constant, reliable traits of yours. You never went to high school, but still stayed so sharp that I was calling you for help on my geography homework. I don't remember the name of that ancient Aztec city or why it was important, but you still did in your 80s. You documented the weather on a daily basis, remembered everyone's birthdays, and helped the church in all the ways that you could. My friends and my brother's friends invited you to their weddings and graduation parties because even kids that were not your grandchildren still loved you like you were their family. As children, my brothers and I always loved going over to your house for an afternoon. Many summer days were spent playing bingo with you, in which you read the numbers out and we competed to win thrift shop knickknacks and McDonald's toys you kept in the prize box for us to win. Your shelves and walls were lined with photos of family members, chicken and cowboy trinkets, and religious decor. Soap operas like One Life to Live played in the background on the television, and root beer was always kept in the fridge. You grew rhubarb near the shed in our backyard as we picked it and dipped the sour stalks into a bowl of sugar for a summer treat. Your garden grew the biggest cucumbers I've ever seen, and Mom will make pasta sauce from your juicy, fresh tomatoes. Many summer evenings were spent together on canal walks, while you, my mother, and my aunt would chat. My brothers and I would pick blackberries or throw rocks in the water. One of my favorite memories I have for you are watching you make your famous German New Year cookies. I still have the photos of the last night you showed us how to make them, several Decembers ago. You carefully spooned the batter into the hot waffle iron and pressed it until the batter transformed into a large, flat cookie that was golden brown in color and pressed with intricate patterns. The sweetness of the sugar was balanced by the spiciness of the cinnamon and anise. Mom gave me a copy of a recipe and I tried making them myself for the first time yesterday. Although it took several messy attempts to get it right, I finally mastered the thin waffle maker. The cookies don't quite taste the same way without you, but then again, they never would have. I still have almost all the gifts you've ever given me. The crocheted Afghan with the cats on them, the singing bear, the tea sets and porcelain dolls, all stored away in boxes in Illinois. However, I do have some of my most prized possessions from you right here on my desk with me. The cowbell from Germany, the last portrait of yourself you gave me, the original photo of you and Grandpa after you came home from World War II. Your poetry book is nearby, sitting safely in the closet shelf. Sometimes I will open it and read your poems about how you dreamed of being a cowgirl. I wanted so badly for you to make it to 100 years on this planet, and you almost did. The amount of history and changes you saw during your time on this earth was so fascinating. When you were a toddler, you, your mother, and sister came to America from Germany, passing through the Ellis Island gates into an unfamiliar language and land. You spent your childhood in the Great Depression, your early womanhood through a world war, and started motherhood before Hawaii and Alaska were even states. You watched cars, television, air travel, and computers become commonplace. Watched a man step foot upon the moon, and phones become mini computers people carry in their pockets. You were born 1 year after the last great worldwide pandemic took your brother's life and lived partially through this one. There's an old African proverb that says, when an old woman dies, a library is burned to the ground. I try to salvage as much as your story as I could with the video I made when I filmed you telling your life story a few years ago. But it wouldn't be enough, nor the same as if you were telling me them again yet today. No amount of questions I could ask can completely reveal your life and all of its nuances, stories, and intricacies. No amount of words I could write about you could ever paint the picture of the incredible human you were. No amount of time I could spend with you could ever be enough. When Grandpa died suddenly, I used to comfort myself in knowing that I would someday see him again in heaven. The older I've become and the more I learned about astrophysics, the existence of heaven to me became more of a possibility rather than absolute certainty. Perhaps I would someday see you standing next to God at the pearly gates. Perhaps we would see each other again as ghosts and hang out all day at your house or even at the church. Perhaps we'll meet again in a different planet, reality, or alternate universe, maybe in one that is exclusively your paradise, where all your hopes and wishes have come true, where there's no hurt and suffering, and you are the cowgirl you always wanted to be, riding your pony in the Montana mountains. Perhaps we'll meet the exact same way in the exact same place again, if all of existence repeats itself in a time loop. There are an infinite number of perhaps and possibilities, and at least one in which I may, unfortunately, never see you again at all. If this or any other universe or afterlife does not have you, then they are all missing something amazingly wonderful, as so am I and everyone that has ever known you. However, most of me still believes that we will see each other again, somewhere and somehow. If we don't, then I am still so speechlessly fortunate to have had almost 3 decades of an incredible, compassionate, gentle, and loving person as my grandmother. I love you, Grandma, always and forever.
Okay. I'm assuming that was the end. All right. Thank you, Sarah. That's very sweet. You're just the sweetest person.
Sweetest person, trust me.
Nah. All right. I will let you go and let me get Tom here. All right. So, hello. You're still here.
I am.
That's good.
Of course, I'm here when I'm here.
Awesome. All right. So, what are you reading for us tonight?
First, that was really beautiful what so just read, and I around this time do my own sort of recollecting, and so I wrote a story that is also sort of about remembering things, but it's not as well written emotionally as that. So
Oh, okay. Well,
So-
we're not all as warm and fuzzy, but
so I've got a short story.
all right, sounds good. I will let you read.
Thanks. All right, the story is called Simplot's Hill and the Nez Perce Horses. After I graduated from college in California, I entered what I'd always thought of as the real world and didn't return back to my hometown of Boise, Idaho to visit my parents for 3 years. Over those years, time took on a different sort of flavor. Before, it was something light, airy, and fizzy, something you'd drink on a grassy hillside on a summer day. Eventually, it started to taste more like coffee that was always either too hot or not hot enough. I just never could find that Goldilocks spot for some reason. It was fall. My second year teaching high school English was already underway. With the Christmas holiday break approaching, the thought occurred to me that it was time to see how the quaint old town of my youth was faring in my absence. I was delighted to spend my break from school just like I had when I was a child, when someone else took care of the logistics, the real things. I made the arrangements, informed my parents, then spent the better part of November and early December tearing off the police tape and reaching back into the saccharine memories of childhood Christmases, excavating nostalgic snippets like dinosaur bones from a sticky primordial soup. Across the street from the house I grew up in, atop a pile of bulbous hills, sat a mansion that was so high up it became near invisible on cloudy days. A billionaire named Simplot lived in it. I hadn't realized what a part of the fabric of my childhood the image of that mansion up on the hill had been. It hit me as my father drove me home from the Boise airport. His Buick crested the on-ramp to Boise's only freeway, and I thought perhaps I was hallucinating. "Hey, Dad," I started, in that tone of voice meant for reassuring oneself of his own sanity. "I might be wrong, but I don't see Simplot's mansion up on his hill." "Oh, yeah, you didn't hear? They demolished it. It's gone." I hadn't heard. How was I supposed to hear that? I didn't have my ear to the ground of the latest Boise happenings. The rest of the ride home went without words, as I'd been struck silent, frankly surprised at my dad's nonchalance. It somehow felt that he or my mom should have warned me that in just 3 years' time, this had now become a town where mansions on hills got demolished and fathers and mothers living at the bottom didn't bat an eye. Later that evening, after the anticipation for my return had lifted, my parents and I sat in our family living room, the TV tuned to the local news at 10. My mother, in anticipation for my return, had purchased 4 boxes of sugary cereal, a bowl of which I now held propped on my knee. My father sipped at his Canadian beer from the bottle. A fire whirled and snapped from the traditional open fireplace. I picked up the remote to try to find something Christmas related, but upon looking over at my parents and to find them both with eyes closed, breathing deep, enmeshed into the couch peacefully, I gave up. I finished my cereal and went to bed. The next morning, I called my brother. He was 2 years my senior and elected to remain in California, his wife expecting their first child in January. We exchanged pleasantries as I sipped at coffee that was not hot enough. After a minute, I delivered the news about the void at the top of the Simplot Hill. "Oh," he said, "that's crazy." Relief did not flow from the cell phone down into my body like I'd hoped. "It's spooky, really," I said. "There's just a big, empty space there. I feel like I discovered we had an extra family member that died." "End of an era," he said, simply. I tried to picture him nodding sullenly. A lull passed between the thousands of miles over which our voices were being sent. I could hear my sister-in-law say something in the background about hospitals. My brother asked me to hold on. After a minute, his voice returned to the line. "Are you going to go sledding on the hill?" It was a question I hadn't been prepared for. I don't know. I mean, I'm a grown man now." "Oh, you are? When did that happen?" He laughed, and I chose to laugh as well. "I think it was around the time I received my first student loan payment notice in the mail." No more Simplot, no more sledding. Now it's Merry Christmas, Love, Sally Mae. I guess so. And like that, the conversation came to an end. Over the next few days, as I relaxed and tried to enjoy the holiday in the ways I always used to, my shock and anger, feeling as if events were decided on and undertaken all right under my nose without my consent, faded into vague disquietude. What else about this town was gone? Where else did I need to amend this now outdated history book of my childhood? There was one other person who I thought may feel as strange about the absence of the mansion as I did. My friend Brittany. She was a freckled, jubilant girl with curly red hair and a penchant for idiosyncrasy and cowboy boots. We had gone to school together from kindergarten all the way through high school. Her family lived at the foot of the other side of the Simplot Hill. Often we'd run all over the hill together, in summer sliding down the green grass on convenience store ice blocks, trading them in winter for the plastic sleds and saucers from the distant outlet stores. After we graduated high school, we didn't speak much. She had gone off to a state school and graduated with a nursing degree, then gotten a job in a hospital in Vancouver where she now lived. By chance, though, she too was in town for the holidays, and we arranged over Facebook to meet. We ate dinner at a pizza by the slice place downtown and caught up. We were both relieved to find traces of our high school selves still intact in each other, as if that proved something. After having a drink at the adjacent bar, we decided against a movie and instead drove up to Table Rock, a mesa that overlooked the city. A giant Christian cross, bestrewn with bulbs all over like a Broadway marquee, stood illuminated atop the mesa each night. We parked underneath the cross and sat on a ruined concrete wall replete with graffiti. I chose to sit on a hastily sprayed trio of words that read like an epitaph. Stay classy, Boise. Below us was the clustered glow of the greater downtown area, from which smaller and less crowded residential lights retreated. In the darkness, the surrounding hills, single pinpricks of light, the last vestiges of ranches and recluses, mirrored the stray stars above. A blotch of black was painted over a section of the horizon formerly occupied by the Simplot mansion. His American flag I'd always heard riffling from the 200-foot flagpoles no longer there to salute the skyline. I hadn't said anything about it to Brittany. We sipped hot chocolate and Baileys from thermoses for a silent 5 minutes. How's the temperature? I asked. Too hot, she said. Never the Goldilocks spot. What? Nothing, I said. We pointed to constellations of lights and described the buildings we knew to be there. The old art house movie theater downtown, the minor league baseball stadium, the imposing Capitol building. We reminisced about an ill-fated field trip in elementary school out to a frontier site which was said to have been one of the stops on the Oregon Trail. I noted how many more stars in the night sky I could see here than in California. Brittany agreed and said Vancouver was the same, and that sometimes it made sense that they called this Treasure Valley. Sometimes, Brittany said, breathing puffs of white breath into her drink, I wish I lived way out in the hills, away from everybody. I'm surprised to hear you say that. You, the nurse, you who everybody was friends with at school, who everybody liked. She nodded. Her red hair fell out from beneath a cap she'd knitted herself, awash with the cross's luminescence. Why? I don't know. There's always so much going on. I could manage things better, I guess. I could have a horse. A horse, huh? Yeah, she said. Like the Nez Perce. You remember learning about the Nez Perce? They had the most horses out of any other Native American tribe. Something like that. I remember this one line. With all those horses, the Nez Perce were the wealthiest, most mobile, most innovative people on the continent. It was like they could do whatever they wanted. I uncapped my thermos and inhaled the steam. She went on. The horses, they were everything to them. When one of them died, the local tribe mourned it like a family member had been lost. But eventually, horses stopped being currency. The new technology surpassed the horse's utility. I remember, I said. The game was changing at that point. Right. The world sort of moved on without them. They became antiques, I guess. I always wondered how the horses felt. I mean, it's not like they asked to be currency in the first place. It's not their fault. What was important to people changed. Maybe horses like it better now, I ventured. Maybe they like just standing around and relaxing more than being pushed to work hard all the time. Maybe, she said. But if I were a horse, I'd rather pull a plow through the fields every day for a poor family who loves me, rather than stand around licking salt licks and waiting for my rich owner to put a stud semen in me. Can't say I blame you. We listened to the silence drift around us like the vapors from the hot chocolate. In California, you can almost always hear a freeway or an airplane somewhere in the distance. All I could hear up on this mesa was the wind whipping through the bitter brush and cheatgrass. They were losing so many to trade and battle and famine. They decided there would be no more mourning for horses or humans. What? No more mourning for horses or humans. Who? The Nez Perce. Oh, I said. Do they still have the most horses? I don't know, probably not, she said. But it doesn't really matter, does it? I guess not, I conceded. We didn't say anything after that for a while. We just looked at the flickering lights of the city, the wind pressing against us and our jackets like an icy down blanket. Eventually, I said something. You know, that all makes me think of something. She looked over at me and I realized my voice didn't sound like my own. I swallowed a gulp from the thermos and I looked at Brittany's freckles. How did she still have freckles after all this time? These are the same freckles she had when we were kids. What? She said, after the silence had gone on too long. Nothing. She looked out at the city. Come on, just say it. Might be another 7 years before we talk again, you know. And who knows what the world will be like then. My memories of playing on the Simplot Hill beneath the mansion threaded through my imagination like a newsreel. I said, watching the darkness where my feet hung from the wall. You ever feel like you're somehow not speaking the same language as everybody else? She laughed. Aren't you an English teacher? Yeah, I said, I am. And I can explain things like grammar rules, but it's just, there are times that I want to say something, but everything I say seems to take me farther away from what I meant. I can picture in my mind what I expected, the meaning of what I want to get across, but in the end, it's never just right, she said, cutting me off. She stared at me and I stared back at her. Her face softened. That's probably why we say things like Merry Christmas to each other. Well, I said, raising my thermos. Merry Christmas, I guess. She raised hers back. Merry Christmas. Once there was no more Baileys and hot chocolate, we returned to the car and drove back to our childhood homes. The evening hours before my flight back to California were spent sitting in the living room with my parents in the fireplace, watching the news just like the first night I'd arrived. The only difference being I'd eaten all the cereal by this point, so I was drinking one of my dad's Canadian beers. The holiday was over, and it was time to start facing up to reality again. My flight to California had a stop in Las Vegas with a 2-hour layover. I called my house's number to say goodnight to my parents and to thank them for the trip. It was really great to get to see you and see how things have changed. You know, my dad said. Speaking of change, a guy's coming out tomorrow to disconnect the landline. From now on, you'll have to call one of our cell phones. I stopped walking in the terminal. Countless people of all ages and backgrounds filed around me, going to hundreds of different places to do thousands of different things. Do you know how to patch in Mom from her cell phone? I asked. No, my mom said, apologetic upon hearing what she expected. You kids are on cell phones all the time nowadays. We figured we needed to join the rest of the world. And we didn't have reason to keep paying for it anymore, my dad added. I'd always felt partial to it. It was the first series of numbers I ever memorized. And here I was having the last conversation I would ever have after dialing that number. I wish I'd known sooner, I said, not knowing why. We're sorry, honey, my mom said. It's okay, I said, my voice hoarse. It makes sense. I'll just have to choose to call one of you now instead of calling my parents as a collective. Well, my mom said, her voice light, we are two different people. I took a seat in one of the chairs flanking the nearest gate. A flash of light caught my attention from a row of TV monitors above. It was some kind of documentary looking back on events and people of the 90s. Even without being able to hear the sound, I felt like I could tell what they were saying. I got up from that chair and I walked to a nearby sports bar. The inside was filled with men and women dressed in business attire or bundled in sweaters. I took the last stool available at the bar, flanked by two large men in suits with square shoulder pads. The bartender asked what I would have. Do you have any Canadian beer? I asked. He shook his head. Regular beer, then, I said. He smirked, Then, when he saw I wasn't going to say anything else, shrugged and filled up a glass with blonde liquid from the tap next to him. I sipped it. It was flat. Every TV at the bar was tuned to a horse race. In front of each place on the bar was an interface, which the patrons could use to place bets. For lack of anything better to do, I scanned the list of horses and stopped suddenly when I reached a certain name. I turned to one of the men in suits next to me. "Are these names for this race going on right now?" I asked. "Yeah. Race starts in 10 minutes. Bets are closing." "Where is a race happening at this hour?" "New Caledonia," he said without batting an eye. I thanked him. He watched me as I scrolled through the interface and selected my horse. "Simplot? You're going with Simplot? Kid, that horse has got no shot to win. He's a substitute horse with a substitute jockey. He shouldn't even be running." I locked in the bet and the man shook his head. I raised my glass of flat beer to the horses on the TV. "Merry Christmas, Simplot." "Thank you very much. That's all."
Let's see. Well, that was most excellent. Let's see. I will just go ahead and get everybody else back on here so I don't end up taking up all this time. I'm so excited that we can like actually get everybody in on the screen at the same time now. I feel like I'm missing someone. Richard, Shannon, Tom, Sue.
Sarah?
Sarah isn't here. Yes. You're right. I don't know what happened to Sarah. Oh, well, if she comes back, I guess we'll add her in. But anyway, how is everybody surviving the pandemic with the writing thingy? Oh, here we go. There's Sarah. We'll add her in. Okay. Hello. We thought we'd lost you.
Yeah. Is anybody getting writing done?
Yeah.
The long pause.
That always seems to be not as much as we hope.
I have like a real problem finishing stuff, so I keep starting new things. But now I'm trying to go back and finish the stuff I haven't finished. It's really hard for me.
Yeah, I did. I've done some writing, which is good, but I'm in school right now too, so it kind of takes precedence. I'm taking a picture of us all, just so you guys know.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, should everyone pose?
Thank you.
I'm glad I wear makeup today. I was thinking, oh, I'm not going to bother because who cares? And then I was like, no, this is going to be up on the internets forever. And I don't want to have to look at like my little baby possum face. So,
Oh, baby.
yeah.
I did the whole, I was like, sweatpants sound great today. And then I was all,
Oh, yeah.
You haven't put on makeup and real clothes in so long. Just do it.
It's so hard though, because when you haven't done it, I mean, I don't know, Tom and Richard probably can't relate to this, but it's like, I mean, I can't even remember like quite how to do it. It used to just be bada bing, bada boom, and just it would magically happen. And now I'm just kind of like, oh, I don't know what to use, and I don't know what to do. I don't know.
My eyes literally revolted. Like it's like the light is shining on me just right, but there's huge bags because they swelled up because I put makeup on them. And they got all irritated. My contacts dried out, and I was like, "Why did I ever do this?"
I think Shannon, you look pretty snazzy tonight.
Thank you. I feel like it's like a Mad Hatter hat. It's so perfect.
It is great.
Yeah.
Also, Shannon tried to teach me a new word today, and it's already left my mind. And I'm going to write it down.
Sluchy.
Fluchy?
Sluchy.
Sluchy. Yes, like a slut and a hoochie.
Yeah, that's right. Because I had an existential crisis when I was trying to get dressed for tonight because I was going to wear a blazer. And then, so I've put on some weight and my blazers didn't fit. So I tried on this vest and I was like, oh, I just look like a slut. And then I had a friend say, just send me a picture over Messenger and I'll tell you for real if you're going to go on there and be lambasted for what you're wearing. So I did. I sat in my bedroom for like 20 minutes going, I'd already put on makeup. I can't take this off.
That's when you know the commitment has been made to your wardrobe choices.
Right. I was like, I should have thought more about this before I put on makeup and did my hair. I could have had come on. I would have taken it all off and then come on and just had like crazy psycho hair, and it would have been perfect, really, for the. I figure it's all fair.
Yeah, well, it's amazing that anybody's hair looks sort of under control right now. I mean, you know, given the pandemic, I mean, for a while, I think we all were sort of looking like, you know, something out of Lord of the Rings.
My hairdresser gave me a secret, and it was use a Sharpie. A Sharpie, because I have white hair. I have a significant amount of white hair.
Oh my gosh. I think this year is doing that to us. I think we're just going to all have like Bride of Frankenstein streaks.
Why not?
But I love the purple hair too. And I have weighed constantly during this. Like, I just want to look like the Bride of Frankenstein. It's perfect. I always grew up thinking I would. Like, you know, to me, it was how Native aunties looked and everything. The long dark hair and the big white streaks. And so I was like, I'm going to grow up and look like that. And now I'm like, but purple.
Mm-hmm.
That
If you can go with purple, I mean, purple is fun.
Right.
So let's see. Does anybody, well, actually, I don't know, since the theme was gifts, does everyone here still have an easy time figuring out how to answer the question, what do you want for Christmas? Or is that one like a hard one?
Definitely hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Other than books, sometimes that's about it, you know.
Yeah, I just say I have books on my Amazon list, but that's what I do non-COVID or COVID. So
Right.
just give me some books.
Yeah, I just feel like after a certain age, it's like, you know, the things you really want are like the intangible things, and they don't really, you know, fit on the list. And it's like,
What do we want for Christmas? 2020 to end.
I think we all want that for Christmas.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the whole vaccine thing seems like sci-fi to me.
So it's crazy they got it out.
Well, and the vaccine itself is kind of sci-fi-ish, I guess, in a way. It's like the first of this kind, I think, that they've used. I'm not sure. I might be wrong.
Most vaccines are essentially dead viruses or dead bacteria. This one is just a specific piece of the virus, of the RNA code, rather than the whole virus itself. So it's different than other vaccines for sure.
Yeah, I wondered how that was going to be, considering they tell us that you can get it more than once. You can keep getting it. So I was like, how does a vaccine work then? Because that's...
Yeah, although there's some, I mean, I haven't seen anything definitive, but some people think you're not getting it more than once. You just never got over it.
Okay.
So it's I've seen it both ways, so it's hard to tell. But I know there are people that still have it months later. So it can take a long time to get over.
I know a lot of long haulers too. That's why I don't want to get it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, Deb says, I'm literally working on a project about procrastination, and the whole pandemic thing has been really rough on a lot of people from a productivity perspective. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Probably a lot of like cleaning, getting done, things like that.
Yeah, all the other things. But yes, I don't know. I haven't really gotten much writing done. I was proud of myself when I got some stuff done on my blog for, you know, my therapy practice. But, you know, I'm just kind of feeling like I've been dog paddling like all through like the most of 2020. Like,
how about me?
A reading, I have been doing some reading. I'm currently reading Anxious People by, is it Frederick Bachman, I think? He wrote Beartown, and a man called Ove. He's like, kind of, yeah, a literary darling right now. Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson, which is a very strange book. It's like written in sort of free verse, so it definitely takes some getting used to, especially since there will be like 2 columns of text, and it's like basically like the idea is like this woman has a lot of anxiety, and so it's like I think it's supposed to be like the sort of conflicting voices in her head like on the page. So it's interesting, but yeah, lots of other things there, but I'm sure other people here have read books this year.
Yeah, interestingly for me, I'm still writing, maybe not quite as fast as I have at times, but it's the other stuff related to writing that I'm not getting done. I'll go hide in the stories and forget about everything else.
Yeah, well, there's some escapism there. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, like now that I'm hanging out with my old writing group in New Jersey, and the guy that runs it, he's got an engineering background, so he's like very into routines. So anytime I got to talk to them, I figure I got to write something first.
That's good.
We have a Tuesday support group every week, and we're supposed to say what we accomplished this week. And I'm like, so then, but it's very motivating. There's no way I could run something like that.
So, yeah, there are things it's like during Mile High Con, which is kind of weird. The panels were really nice, but Somtao from Thailand was on some panels from Thailand. He didn't come; he was in Thailand, so that was kind of cool. There are other people around the country that participated that wouldn't normally participate, so that part was kind of good.
Yeah.
So there's there are good things, but and now I suppose that we have the capability, we'll know how to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
We have every month there's this women's writing circle, obviously for just women, and anybody.
I want to join.
At first, this guy that runs everything, Carl, I was like, "Where's Carl?" And then I realized he wasn't a woman. So, but it's really anybody wants the link. I mean, they're totally open to people from all over the country. That's what's happening. Like we got people from Arizona and Washington State and Kansas and Colorado. That's me. It's great, and I think a lot of places are going to keep on with the Zoom component, So it's just changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, it is nice, like being able to get everybody together from different places. But I was reading something on LinkedIn because I'm really cool. About like Zoom fatigue and like how hard the Brady Bunch screen is on our brains and everything, doing it all day. And, since like I am in video meetings all day, I'm like, oh my God.
It's like I'm saying, hey, I got to go. I'm late for another meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
I know. So it's just, I don't know. I wish we could just get past this, human brain thing. Like maybe, we can just like rapidly evolve into having cyborg brains. So we're not like looking for like all these other cues and, not getting them and, having the brain just kind of going like, what's going on?
I'm waiting for the opportunity to wear all my new shoes.
Girl. Yeah.
I just want to be able to go out to dinner.
That too. Yeah.
With friends or, having a drink with friends. So, yeah.
With them actually there.
Yeah. I've discovered it's kind of harder to do online things. You'd think I could make all the things now, right? I have teenagers But when it's online, it's more disruptive than, say, if I just leave the house, right? So instead, everybody's tiptoeing around the house while I'm doing a Zoom meeting or whatever. And yeah, so it was something I never would have thought of before, that would be problematic.
Yeah.
It's strange.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes we're competing for bandwidth here. That's something else I've noticed, especially if you have people in the home who like to play video games online. It's like, I've noticed that like I've started trying to not schedule clients after 7 p.m. because otherwise it's like things are exploding in the background and then like the internet connection gets really slow. And so then I'm like, oh yeah.
I can't imagine having like kids during this. It's got to be overwhelming.
Mm-mm. Or boy roommates.
Boy roommates?
Yeah. They're in their early 40s.
Boy, 40s boys.
Well, I guess, I don't know. I know that we all probably want to like, get something to eat and, get to sleep or whatever we're doing. But, I just wanted to be respectful of everybody's time. But thank you so much for, coming and joining me and being here and sharing these stories.
Of course. Thanks. Thanks again, Amy, for putting this together.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
Great.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
every time we get to do it. It's really
So-
fun.
Yeah. Is Deb Courtney the president of Pikes Peak Writers now?
She is now.
She is now, yes.
That rocks.
Yeah, right. Yes, she is the person in charge.
I don't know if
Taking
she's.
butt and taking names.
That's so cool. I like it.
Yeah, I don't know if she feels the same way, but she will do everything. She does everything with passion. So I know she'll be great.
I
Yeah.
figure it's long delayed. She's been
Right.
working with writers for a long time and done so much. So
That's very
Yeah.
cool. Well, right on. I don't know if she's still here, but just
Yeah.
I've been
don't
going
know.
back and forth from YouTube.
You never know with them.
yeah. Well, tell her
She's
anybody sees her, tell her rock on.
awesome. Will do. And yeah, so good night, everyone. Take care. Stay safe. Stay
night.
away from other people, especially. All right. Here we go. So yeah, just getting everybody. Oh, sorry, Sarah, you're stuck with me for a second here. There we go. Now, all right. So it is just me here signing off. And I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things if you're still here with me that so this Friday, Audacious Theater, based here in Denver, is going to be premiering their, what is it? I believe it's Christmas, it's Drunk Christmas, the video premiere. And basically what it is a sort of musical drunken summary of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And you can watch it for free on their Zoom. But you do have to subscribe to their newsletter, at least to get the Zoom link. So, but it will be available to be seen later if you want to do that too. So, definitely check it out. I mean, I usually go to that every year live, but of course that's not an option right now because COVID. Also on, I believe it's Saturday at 5 p.m. Travis Hierman is going to be hosting a book launch on Facebook, and that link is actually in the Stories Live group on Facebook. So if you join our group, you'll see it there. Or of course, you can look up Travis Hierman. His last name is spelled Heermann. And on Sunday at 6 p.m., the Dollhouse Thieves, who have been on our show before, are going to be doing their holiday spectacular online. So, if you're in the mood for some music, that might be a thing to check out. Anyway, other than that, I will see you along with Jeffy Kennedy and many other people on January 20th. And I hope you have a good night. Wear your mask, wash your hands, stay away from other people. They have cooties, and stay safe. All right. Good night.